Okay, imagine this. A certified genius,
Yeah.
I mean, Harvard educated, a mathematician,
Right.
who for 17 years just unleashed this wave of terror across America.
But handmade bombs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Handmade. And he became this sort of phantom, evading the biggest FBI manhunt ever.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. And the big question, the one we kept asking looking at the sources is, how does someone that brilliant become the Unabomber?
That's exactly what we're digging into today. This whole deep dive is about Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah.
We've gone through the sources to really try and understand, where did these crimes come from? How did this hunt go on for so long, nearly 2 decades?
Unbelievable.
And what about his legacy? Because disturbingly, it still kind of echoes today.
It does. So for everyone listening, we're trying to piece together this really dark, really complex story.
Step by step.
So we'll look at Kaczynski's background, the early brilliance, and then, well, the descent.
And the bombing campaign itself, 17 years of it.
Yeah, the hunt, which seemed impossible for so long.
Chasing a ghost, basically.
Pretty much. And then how he was finally caught. Kind of surprising, actually.
Very. Through his own words, essentially.
Right. And we'll finish by looking at, like you said, the legacy, the shadow he still casts. So where do we start? The beginning.
I think we have to start with the intellect. Our sources are clear. Theodore Kaczynski was, well, exceptionally smart.
The IQ score was?
What was it?
168,
Yeah.
reportedly, which is just staggering.
Wow.
He got into Harvard when he was only 16.
16.
Yeah. And then by his mid-20s, he's the youngest assistant math professor at Berkeley, a really prestigious position.
So the sources paint this picture of just like pure academic promise.
Exactly. Which makes the contrast with what came later just so stark, so jarring.
It really is almost incomprehensible. How do you go from youngest professor at Berkeley to that?
Well, the sources point to 1969 as a key year. That's when he just walks away from it all.
Abandons academia completely.
Yep, and moves to a tiny remote cabin out in Montana. No electricity, no running water. Wow, so the central question really is, what happened? What triggered that massive shift?
The forces suggest it wasn't just one thing, probably. Definitely a major factor, maybe the main one, according to his own writings, was this intense rage against technology.
Ah, the Manifesto.
Right. He saw technology as destroying human freedom, basically crushing the human spirit. He was vehemently anti-progress, anti-industrial society.
But there were maybe other things too. I remember seeing something about Harvard.
Yes, one source mentions a brutal experiment he was involved in at Harvard. The details in our materials are a bit scarce on that, honestly.
Okay.
But it does raise questions about, psychological stress, maybe social isolation, the pressure of academia back then. Could those have played a part in his later disillusionment?
It seems plausible, right? That it wasn't just about ideology, maybe some personal trauma or pressure fed into it.
It's certainly possible, and they're his journals. They're
Yeah.
pretty disturbing. They apparently reveal this chilling belief he developed that that killing people was actually a humane way to fight back against this technological progress he hated.
Humane. Wow. That's a terrifying twist in logic.
It really is. You can see how his thinking became so warped, so dangerous.
So this extreme ideology, this justification for violence, that's where the bombing campaign comes from.
It seems that way. This worldview, documented in his own writings, looks like the foundation for it all. And the sources tell us the first bomb showed up in 1978.
And that was the start, the beginning of 17 years of fear.
17 years. It's
Okay.
hard to really wrap your head around that length of time.
Absolutely, from 78 to 95. And during that time, his bombs killed 3 people.
And injured 23 others, some very seriously.
And the targets, this is what made it so scary for so long, right? They seemed random.
Totally. University professors, airline executives, people involved in tech.
Yeah.
There wasn't an obvious link for years.
Which must have just amplified the public fear. Anyone could be next.
Exactly. And from an investigative standpoint, as the sources highlight, that lack of a clear pattern was a nightmare. How do you profile someone? How do you predict the next attack?
And the bombs themselves, they weren't simple devices, were they?
Not at all. Our materials really emphasize the craftsmanship. They were handmade, often using wood, bits of scrap metal.
Meticulously put together.
Incredibly meticulous. He used materials and techniques specifically designed to avoid leaving forensic evidence. No fingerprints, components that couldn't be easily traced.
Like a ghost.
One source even calls it expert craftsmanship, which is, a pretty chilling description given the context.
And he wasn't just operating in one place either?
No, the bombings happened across 5 different states. Think about the logistical challenge that poses for law enforcement, trying to connect dots across jurisdictions.
Especially back then, without the technology we have now.
Right. And for years, there were no demands. No letters, no calls, no communication explaining why.
Just the violence itself.
Just the terror, which left the FBI completely in the dark about motive for a long, long time.
You can see how one person working alone could effectively, as one source puts it, paralyze a nation.
Absolutely. The uncertainty, the fear, it was pervasive. And the FBI threw everything they had at it. The Unabomber task force, millions of dollars, huge numbers of agents.
But they were chasing shadows for years.
For years, it felt impossible.
But then there was that sketch, wasn't there, in '87?
Yeah, the composite sketch of a man seen near one of the bombing locations. And interestingly, one source notes that this actually spooked him.
Really?
Yeah, apparently enough that he stopped bombing for about 6 years after that.
Wow. So even he wasn't completely untouchable. The pressure got to him a little.
It seems so. A small crack in the facade, but still, that long silence just highlights how difficult the case was.
Yeah, 6 years of nothing. Must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators.
Immensely. Despite all their efforts, profiling, forensics, solid leads just weren't materializing. As our sources confirm, it was one of the most baffling, resource-intensive manhunts in FBI history.
Until 1995.
Until 1995. And the big turning point, which all our sources focus on, the Manifesto.
The publication of Industrial Society and its Future. 35,000 words.
It's ironic, isn't it? He demanded newspapers publish it to get his message out.
Thinking it would, what, spark a revolution?
Maybe. Or at least justify his actions to the world. But instead,
it led them right to him.
Precisely. Because within that long, dense text were specific phrases, ways of writing.
Linguistic fingerprints.
Kind of, yeah. Distinctive patterns. And someone recognized them.
His brother, David Kaczynski.
Yes. David read the manifesto, or parts of it, after it was published. And our sources detail how he started noticing similarities to letters he'd received from Ted over the years.
Specific phrases like, what was it, cool-headed logicians?
That's one example mentioned, yeah. Things that sounded exactly like his estranged brother Ted.
That must have been an incredibly difficult realization.
Yeah.
And then deciding to go to the FBI.
A huge decision. Described by some as a betrayal, but driven by this growing suspicion and presumably a sense of needing to stop the violence.
It's just such a dramatic turn. The clue wasn't forensic, it was familial, it was linguistic.
It really is. It shows how even the most careful planning can be undone by something unexpected, like a shared phrase in a letter. David's recognition was the absolute key.
The breakthrough they'd been waiting almost 2 decades for.
Exactly. And that information led the FBI directly to Montana in 1996.
To that remote cabin, which was apparently, well, not exactly tidy.
Filthy is the word used in several sources, just crammed and basic.
And inside, they found everything, right?
Pretty much undeniable proof, according to the sources. They found bomb-making materials, tools.
A finished bomb ready to be sent.
Yes. And crucially, his journals. Detailed accounts of his bombings, his motives.
And thousands of pages of other writings.
An incredible 40,000 pages, reportedly. Handwritten notes, drafts, philosophical musings, just an overwhelming amount of evidence confirming he was the Unabomber.
So after 17 years on the run, his own writings, facilitated by his brother, finally ended the hunt.
The isolation was over, his capture was complete.
And he eventually died in prison just last year in 2023.
He did. But even in prison, our sources indicate he didn't waver. He kept writing, railing against technology, even published books expanding on his manifesto's ideas.
So the story doesn't quite end with his death or capture.
Not entirely. What's both fascinating and, frankly, disturbing is how his ideas linger.
Yeah, the sources point this out quite clearly. His manifesto, sadly, has become sort of required reading for some anti-technology extremists.
It's been cited as inspiration. The Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik, for example, apparently copied huge sections of it for his own manifesto.
That's chilling. Shows how these dangerous ideas can spread and be repurposed.
Absolutely. And then there's this even stranger modern phenomenon mentioned in the sources.
The TikTok memes.
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it? His image, his ideas popping up in this very contemporary, very online context. It's a really uncomfortable kind of relevance.
It really is. It sort of sanitizes him, almost. Detached from the actual violence.
Which is why it's so vital, as our sources implicitly remind us, to constantly bring it back to the human cost.
3 people killed.
23 injured. Horrific, life-altering injuries for many, whatever intellectual arguments he made, he was a terrorist who inflicted immense suffering.
Absolutely crucial to remember that. He wasn't just an abstract thinker, he was violent.
Exactly. His ideology had brutal, real-world consequences.
So wrapping this deep dive up,
Hmm.
what are the main things we've pulled from the sources? We saw this incredibly brilliant mind.
That turned down a path of, well, terror and murder.
We saw the sheer length and difficulty of the hunt, how one person evaded capture for so long.
Almost impossible, it seemed, until his own words tripped him up.
Yeah, that final, unexpected breakthrough.
And maybe, for everyone listening, it leaves us with a sort of uncomfortable thought to chew on.
Which is?
How does someone so intelligent embrace such destruction? And how can ideas, even extreme ones, take hold and lead to such violence?
It definitely makes you think about that ongoing tension, doesn't it, between technology, progress, and, individual freedom or alienation. Kaczynski took that tension to a horrifying extreme.
He absolutely did. A dark exploitation of a complex issue.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's certainly been a journey into a really dark but important piece of recent history.